Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to the Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, where we explore the extraordinary world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week we share inspiring stories and introduce you to remarkable individuals sharing their own transplant stories. Be sure to support us by leaving a 5-star review and subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. Have a transplant story you'd like to share with us or comments about the program? Just send us an email. It's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can connect with us on Facebook at Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. Welcome to episode 38. In this deeply moving episode of Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, we sit down with Dr. Robert Pritt, a man whose life embodies resilience, hope, and unwavering dedication. Dr. Pritt is not only a respected family physician, but also a heart transplant survivor. Despite the challenges of maintaining a medical practice with a compromised immune system, showing incredible strength and determination every single day. So let's get to know Dr. Pritt just a little bit better as we want you to tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I am a 74-year-old family physician who underwent a heart transplant on April 30th, 2011. So I'm in my 14th year of successful transplant. Did a little research, found out the first transplant we just had the anniversary of it on December the 3rd. It was 1967 in Cape Town, South Africa by Dr. Christian Bernard. So a little mini history lesson there. I first developed atrial fibrillation and then went into congestive heart failure. And when I went to my cardiologist, he said, "You're probably going to need a heart transplant in about 10 years. 2 years later, I was on the table.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, I remember when I was in Fort Myers, Florida, I had a neighbor tell me that they had met you and knew you, and they said, there is a Dr. Pritt right here in Fort Myers, and he had a heart transplant. That's after I had my heart transplant. And I said, wow, that might be a good doctor to see, because I would say he's done some research on heart transplants. So that's kind of how we met for the first time, and really impressed. Once we met, we both had stories to tell each other and questions to ask each other. And I thought, hey, Dr. Pritt would be a perfect person to have on this podcast, because we talk about organ transplantation all the time. My big question to you, being a doctor, do you think it was easier for you, or was it maybe scarier and harder for you as being a doctor?
That's a great question, BJ. I've kind of thought about that over the years. And of course, I'm used to being on the other side of the scalpel. And because of my medical training, which interestingly, I didn't start till I was 33 years old, late bloomer, but I've been practicing for 36 now, so I deserve to retire sooner or later. But because of my medical training, I'm aware of all the complications that can occur. And so perhaps maybe I was a little less positive about the outcome than some people might be. However, I only had one significant complication along the way, and as I was mentioned to you earlier, I won 2 pickleball games this morning.
Yeah, so you're doing good. That's for sure. So that's great. Because I know when I went into it, of course, not having a medical degree, but, being sick from birth, they said, you're going to need a transplant, kind of like you. I had transposition of the great vessels, and my heart was messed up from birth. Had the mustard procedure when I was 14. And then about 5-10 years before I had my heart transplant, my cardiologist said, you're probably going to need a transplant before too long. And but I was one of those people, if that's what I need, just do it. And I was kind of the guy that I don't want to know a whole lot. I just want to go into this because it seems like the more you know, the more your nerves can kind of play with you. So that's why I was kind of curious with you if it was easier or harder being a physician, to find out that, hey, it's time and you're going to need a transplant.
Well, a lot of people ask me, said, weren't you afraid of dying on the table? I said, not particularly. Dying under anesthesia is probably a very good way to go.
Yeah.
And I have very strong faith in my Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, so I did not fear death in and of itself. But I was grateful for a good outcome instead of the alternative at the moment.
So yours began was it early that you knew you had this, or did it come on later? Maybe you could tell us, a little bit as your story began.
Yeah, I probably had started having symptoms, cardiac symptoms, in my mid 50s, and then they progressed until the point I had to have a what we call an AICD, or automatic internal cardiac defibrillator, placed, and that's a device that can not only pace your heart, but also, if your heart goes into a fatal rhythm, will shock you out of that rhythm. And that's kind of an interesting side story.
Yeah.
The day before my defibrillator went off for the very first time, we were in Las Vegas. I'd been out there to a medical convention, and the day before we were at a state park and climbing all over the rocks and looking over cliffs and having a good old time. Next day we flew back in Atlanta. I got off the plane and just felt a little funny, nothing specific, no chest pain, or just kind of an odd feeling. And I was making my way to the restroom. I walked into the men's room and my defibrillator went off and my knees buckled and I ended up face planting on the floor. Didn't get hurt, but I alarmed some of the other patrons of the restaurant. They came to my assistant and said, "You okay, buddy? You okay?" I said, "Oh yeah, just my defibrillator going off. No problem. Happens all the time." A little white lie.
Yeah, I had one of those put in, and thank God it never went off. Although I have a friend of mine, Mike Terry, who lives there in Fort Myers, and he had one, and it went like a little sour where it wasn't working correctly. And he had to drive all the way from his wife drove him, obviously, but he had to go all the way from Fort Myers to Tampa. And that thing was going off like about every 5 to 10 minutes. And that must have been one heck of a ride.
Well, my record is seven shocks in a row. And that was 6 too many. So maybe not. It turned out the first time that it went off, it was actually faulty wiring, which was subsequently recalled a few weeks after my event. But the rest of the time, it probably did save my life. So I'm a proponent of if you have propensity to fatal cardiac arrhythmias, get the defibrillator put in. 2 of my children have had defibrillators installed. One of my daughter actually had a heart transplant herself in August of this year, and she's back playing pickleball again too. Can I give you another quick side story?
Yeah, and hey, this is an open forum. Whatever you want to talk about for the next half hour to an hour, it's yours.
So when I was in the hospital, well, before my transplant, I was very athletic. I did these mini triathlons. One of my other daughters and I did these mini triathlons together. And so I was pretty fit. And when I went up to Tampa General for my initial evaluation, I was told I should be a donor, not a recipient. But that didn't last too long. And so after the transplant, I was in the hospital a little longer than average because one of the medicines they gave me is an immunosuppressant to protect my heart adversely affected my kidneys. I was on dialysis for a week in ICU, which I did not mind being in ICU at all. Those nurses up there are terrific. When they go on vacation, they save their lotion bottles from the hotels and bring them to the ICU and they back rubs to their patients.
Wow. I don't know if I got one of those. I think I might have got cheated when I was up there.
Yeah, you need to ask for a refund on that because that was the best part of my whole hospital stay was those back rubs. Anyhow, so I was in the hospital. Normally a patient stays in for 10 days to 2 weeks, and then they're home. I was in for 5 weeks because of them trying to regulate my medication and get it set so it would protect my heart but not fry my kidneys. So it took a little longer than average for me. But when I got out, I was cleared for all activities except skydiving in 3 months. And so I went back to work part-time 3 months after my transplant. My transplant coordinator physician suggested I retire. I said, would you retire if you had heart transplant? She said, well, no, but I don't see sick patients. I said, I'll wear a mask. They'll wear a mask. And that's what we did for the first year after my transplant. I wore a mask and all my patients wore masks. And they were very accommodating. Everybody was very supportive. I got to say that. Although they thought I had cancer before I went in because my color was so bad and I was wearing a pump.
Yeah, because I remember when I had my transplant, one of the big things, they talk about, with the drugs is that you have a low immune system and you're very susceptible to, colds, anything, so, and I think that was one of the first questions I actually asked you when I came in to see you. I said, aren't you afraid, seeing sick patients because, your immune system is so low that it had to be a little bit scary. And I am surprised that you continue your practice. Now, do you still continue today or have you, I know you.
Yes. I'm still operating 4 days a week. The office is open 10 hours a day for 4 days a week. And I'm here usually 12 hours a day.
Oh, wow. You are still rocking.
We're closed on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And, but I digress. This is a cool part of this podcast, I think. So when I got out, I was cleared for sports in 3 months. I delayed it for 4 months. And then on Labor Day of 2011, my oldest daughter, Jennifer, called and said, hey, Dad, you want to play some racquetball? Because I'd been a big-time racquetball player before the transplant. And I thought this would be a good chance to kind of warm back up, not playing with the A players, just, playing around. And so we went up to our community that has a couple of racquetball courts. We played the first game, and I'm pretty sure I won that game fairly handily. We started the second game, and inadvertently, I tell you the truth, I hit her in the butt with a ball really hard. And she has a little histrionic personality type, so she was a drama queen, dancing around and moaning and groaning, gnashing her teeth, wailing. And I thought, just get on with the game, please. And then she crashes into a wall and collapses on the ground in front of me. And so I'm looking at, she was 49, I believe, at the time. She's there on the ground, and I thought I probably should check this out. No pulse, no breathing.
Oh, wow.
So my son-in-law, her husband, was there, and I said, dial 911 and bring me the defibrillator. We had one in the clubhouse. I think they were afraid I was going to croak, so they put one in for me. Anyway, so he took off to do that, and I'm getting ready to start CPR, and this random person who I'd never met before wanders into the clubhouse and says, I'm a doctor. Can I help? I said, well, if you know CPR, absolutely. And it was Dr. Ned Dennehy, who's a radiologist. Normally, radiologists don't even own stethoscopes, but he does calcium scoring and was advanced cardiac life support trained. So he was the one radiologist in Lee County that could have probably made a big difference. At any rate, so we started CPR, and he brought the defibrillator, and he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "You pray." So he started praying, and we started hooking her up and gave her a zap, first zap, and then it recalibrates on its own and goes to a higher voltage. And so after the first zap, nothing happened. And my son-in-law was still pretty nervous, and I said, "Keep praying." And he prayed for a little bit, and he said, "Amen." And just as he said amen, this was like Hollywood, I kid you not. My daughter goes, "Ugh," and she looks up at me, and she says, "I was ahead."
Wow, that had to be a scary moment, the whole situation there for a while.
You know, interestingly, fear was not part of that experience at the moment. The next day I was a wreck. I was an absolute wreck the next day thinking about what had happened. But at the time, my training kicked in. I knew what I needed to do. And at that moment, she wasn't my daughter. She was a patient that was in need of immediate life support. EMS got there very quickly. I got on the phone to my cardiologist and said, "Hey, we've got a doctor over the hospital making rounds now. I'll make sure he meets her in the ER." I said, "Well, all right, I'll be down in a few minutes." So by the time I got to Health Park ER, I went in there asking my daughter. They said, "Oh, she's been admitted already." I said, "What?" Like, she got admitted in 15 minutes. That doesn't happen. If you've ever been to the ER, you know that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But she came in by ambulance. She got admitted in 15 minutes. But the cardiologist still there waiting on me. He said, "Well, I got good news for you." And I said, "Good. I could use some good news." And he said, "You're healthy enough to play racquetball." I said, "Well, I'm not really concerned about me today. I was more concerned about Jennifer." And he said, "Well, she's going to need a defibrillator. We'll put that in tomorrow." It was Labor Day. He said, "We'll put one in tomorrow. She'll be out of here by the weekend." So they did, and she did. And now there are two of us in the family who have had heart transplants. I hope there's not a limit.
Did you get no, I was going to say, did you get a discount on the second one? It should have been like, get one, get the next one for a half price or something.
Yeah, or a BOGO even. That would be even better, right?
Yeah, that would have been much better. So then how much longer? Now, is that her first episode that you figured that out for her, or, were there others?
Yeah, that
before?
was her first. That was her first episode. And that was in 2011. So 13 years ago was her first episode. And so she survived 13 years. And she can tell you, if you talk to her on a podcast, how many times. I think she holds the record for the family for defibrillator firing. So I think she got the record 10 before they helicopter her off to Cleveland Clinic at Weston.
Oh, wow. Now, let me ask you this. As a doctor and as a father, what was that like, knowing that your daughter also needed a transplant after you got yours? Now, just, it had to be a whirlwind of emotions.
I think the first emotion I felt was guilt, because it was pretty obvious at that point in time that this had to be something genetic that I had given her. I had a grandfather who died at age 51. I was 61 when I got my heart transplant. She was 53 when she got hers. And after we realized, that there's very likely a genetic predisposition here, our cardiologist had our entire family tested, kids and grandkids alike. And so there's a gene called LMNA. Sometimes you just abbreviate lamin-A, but LMNA gene mutation, which affects muscles, not always cardiac muscle, but it can affect skeletal muscles as well. And I have one son who has that gene also, who may or may not need a heart transplant at some point.
Wow. Tell you what.
So we're not looking forward to that. We don't, but I guess I felt guilty, and I've since rationalized there's no reason for me to feel guilty. I had nothing to do with my gene pool.
Right.
But parents don't like their kids to be sick, and they feel like they're somehow responsible.
And it seems like when your kid is sick, you take it a whole lot worse than they do a lot of times.
That is true.
Now, going back to what was kind of funny when you said, you've learned that you needed a heart transplant and you were on the other side of the table. It was quite awkward for you. I remember when my wife had breast cancer and I had to become her health caretaker. That was a whirlwind for me and I even was telling the doctor, I don't like, because I'd been sick ever since I was a kid at times. And I said, I don't like being on this side of the bed. It's no fun. I like being on the other side. It's pretty wild stuff. Now, with you being a doctor, do you follow a lot of the research and things like that? Because that's something that, I probably don't do like I should, but I'm wondering about, because I always say, new medicines are coming out and new techniques that can help us transplant patients, because when you really look at it, the anti-rejection meds, they are brutal on a lot of people. And now I'm 21 years, almost 22 years out. And it seems like the skin cancers have always been there because of the medication, but it just seems like in the last year, they've almost went wild.
The simple answer to your question, do I do a lot of research following transplants? No, I do not. I'm consumed with my own practice. I'm board certified in family practice, and so my patients are pretty much my priority. I do have one patient who has had a heart transplant, who's doing well. But I'm always interested when I hear about new things coming out. And of course, with my daughter's recent surgery, I've been more attuned to the scene of transplants. I know they're doing some pig kidney transplants, which is a new thing, genetically modified pig kidneys. So that may be interesting on the horizon. I don't know if that'll translate into hearts later or other organs, but.
Yeah, because I've talked to a few now that, and I wasn't aware of this. Of course, I had the heart transplant, which probably put some antibodies in me. But I know both a young lady and a young man that we talk, pretty often, and they've got antibody problems where it's getting harder for them to find, a donor, even a living or deceased donor, because of their makeup with their antibodies.
Something I did learn on Jennifer's transplant trail. It's a nice alliteration, transplant trail. Is that they told her that because she had 3 pregnancies, she was likely to have more antibodies against a donor heart than someone who had never been pregnant.
Right. Yeah, because that's what this one lady has a problem with, not only, pregnancies, but she also had some other illnesses. So she's had blood transfusions. And like I said, she's been on the list now, I think, going on. Now I'm just going to take but I'm thinking I know it's been over 5-6 years. It seems like it's been forever that she's been waiting for a kidney now for her second one.
And there's a lot of people out there who have excellent kidney function. I always tell my patients who have excellent kidney function, I said, you should consider donating a kidney because you get along just fine without one. But I understand why people are reluctant if they don't have an immediate need, a family member or a close friend who's looking for a kidney.
Another thing that's wild on this podcast that I do, I've had some kidney donors that just woke up in the middle of the night and something came over them saying, there's a lot of people out there looking for kidneys and I have 2 healthy kidneys. I just need to give one up. And one lady, went to the hospital on her own to start finding out about, kidney donations because she was bound and she did too. She actually, donated the kidney, but she didn't care who got it, what their nationality was, what, their race was, what they believed in. She said, I'm giving up my kidney. And she did that very same thing. It's amazing how people can wake up in the middle of the night and just say, I'm giving a kidney.
That's true altruism. And I'm impressed by that as well. I have a friend who got a kidney by posting on Facebook. And somebody read this post on Facebook and went and got tested. They were a perfect match.
Now who was your surgeon for your heart transplant at Tampa General?
My wife keeps saying it was Dr. Sheffield, who was the transplant surgeon that did my daughter's heart. He's now at the Cleveland Clinic in Weston. But I think he was actually the surgeon that harvested the heart, and the surgeon was Hispanic guy whose name I can't even recall at the moment.
Yeah, I had Sheffield too. It was really funny. Now speaking of coincidences, I just had a young lady, probably 4 or 5 episodes, that had a heart transplant, and what's really funny, she was talking about it, and she too had Dr. Sheffield in Weston, and I'm going, wow, amazing! I had him in Tampa, so yeah, he moved over to Weston to get into that program, but. Yeah, there's a lot. He has done a lot of surgeries, that's for sure.
He told me personally, that he's done over 1,600 heart transplants, and that some of the babies that he transplanted are now having children, which I think is amazing. And his longest surviving transplant recipient currently is 35 years out.
Oh, awesome. I always tell people, and I think I've told you this once when I was in your office seeing you for whatever reason I don't even remember at the time, but I says, well, I'm going for the record for the longest living with a heart transplant, not living, but that carried the heart the longest. And I said, after I break the record, then you can break it after me, and I'll have no problem with that.
I remember you saying that. At the time, it was 31 years. The record was 31 years at the time, but we got to live longer now.
Oh, good. Keep them going. I'd like to break a record of about 40 or 50 years. That would be awesome. But some days as I get older, I'm going, I don't know how much longer I got, but I keep fighting it through. So hopefully we've got a few more years in us anyway to raise a little cane.
You never know. One day at a time. I try to live my life one day at a time, and don't plan too far into the future. You never know.
Now, as a doctor, do you have any, what you would maybe tell someone with a transplant, or, maybe you have some words of wisdom? Because I'll rely on your, I know you're a family doctor, but, obviously you've dealt with different patients with different illnesses and transplants. What would be your words of wisdom to them? Because I do have a lot of people that have had transplants that listen to the podcast, and also a lot, which I didn't know until I started hearing from quite a few, that's saying, they really enjoy listening to the podcast because they're currently waiting for an organ, and this gives them hope. So anything you could maybe tell them?
Well, I stay out of elevators with other people. That's my advice. And if you're in an elevator with other people, hold your breath until you get out.
Yeah,
that's one thing I don't like. I don't like being in elevators with other people because you don't know if they've got COVID-19, if they've got influenza, if they've got bronchitis, if they got pneumonia. You just have no way of knowing who's getting in an elevator with you, and you're kind of trapped. There's not a lot of exits from the elevator when it's mid-floor.
And I know too, when I'm in a store and I'm going down an aisle and all of a sudden I hear someone going, it's like, okay, let me get to the next aisle just as fast as I can. I either hold my breath or go in the opposite direction going, I'm going to go around. I don't need to see what's left in this aisle.
I think that's probably just common sense. It doesn't require medical degree to figure that out.
I think it's funny too. A lot of us heart transplant patients who went through COVID, they were saying, use the hand sanitizers, wash your hands, stay away from people, wear a mask. The wife and I both, when COVID hit, said, well, we've been doing that for like the last 15 years. This is nothing new for us. We've done these practices.
Yeah, we were preconditioned, I suppose.
Now, that would be another scary thing. Now, I have talked to a few people that had their transplants actually during COVID, but now you as a doctor, when COVID was out and going around and being a transplant patient, were you a little extra worried, or how did you navigate that situation?
I was probably more cautious than normal, but it didn't really change my daily routine. I still got up in the morning, put my pants on one leg at a time, and got to work and wore a mask. And we had my staff inform anybody that had any symptoms at all of cough or fever, they would be required to wear a mask or reschedule. And I've done a lot of virtual appointments. That's the one thing that COVID has brought about, is people are used to working from home now. And so there's lots of virtual meetings and visits, which cut down on exposure to bacteria and airborne germs.
Well, I know it. I know it stopped my comedy career because I was doing comedy when COVID hit. Had a great, set of bookings on the way too. Probably making the most money I've ever made in comedy, and then that came about, and so I totally stepped away from it. And then as things started getting better, I was still a little nervous, and now it's been so long that, every once in a while I think about comedy, but I'm much older now too, because it's been like 4 years now. And so I just enjoy the podcast and kind of kick back and relax and call myself retired.
Well, I think what you're doing is a service to humanity, and just putting it out there. I think it takes more courage to be a donor than it does to be a recipient.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So my hats are off to people willing to donate organs to help others live a normal life, and it puts them at a little bit of extra risk, not a lot, but a little bit of extra risk, and so it requires some.
And the
bravery.
And the donor family is amazing people too, because I can only imagine, you're at your most vulnerable time ever after losing a loved one. And then, as things are progressing, you have people walk into your room and, they do it with dignity and kindness. And I know I've talked to donor families that have been in the program and just say, the respect, it was unbelievable in the whole, process. But, to hear those words, well, it looks like, we're on life support. They're not going to make it out. They're brain dead. Would you be willing to give up their organs so others could live? Has to be, a daunting task, but they're amazing people, and we all thank them for it too.
Absolutely.
Because I know, as a parent, and you as a parent, that'd just be one of the roughest times to ever go through to make that decision.
Let me tell you just one quick little vignette, which is very interesting in my transplant tale or trail. So after the transplant, I was very taken by the genuine altruism of those family members who were willing to make a donation of an organ. And I immediately wanted to write a letter of thanks. And the transplant team said, well, you can write the letter now, but we won't mail it for a year. And I'm like, well, I want to say thanks now, not a year from now.
Yeah.
Said they need time to grieve for their loved one, and getting a cheery letter about how well you're doing is not going to help them at this point in time. So wait a year and write the letter. So I decided I'd do that. And then the anniversary of my transplant came along. I thought, that's a bad time to send a letter, the anniversary of someone's death. So I waited another 6 months, and then I was still hesitant about this letter. And so I asked my kids, I said, listen, I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to send it to you for proofreading and editing. But you need to take it from the vantage point that you're the recipient family, or you're the donor family rather than the recipient family this time. And let me know if you think this letter is adequate to express my appreciation and thanks to the donor family. So I wrote this, what I thought was a pretty good letter, and sent it around to all the kids, and they all said, oh yeah, great letter, Dad, go ahead and send it. Well, you don't trust your kids no matter how old they are. So I needed another opinion. I had a friend who was a psychologist, and I said, she'll be the perfect person to review this letter and let me know if I can go ahead and put it in the mail or not. And she agreed to take a look at it. And I worked with her at one of the local nursing homes in town. And we had a little private area that we could get together and go over this letter. And we were sitting down to review it when this nurse bebops in. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, am I interrupting something?" My initial reaction was, yes, this is really important, go away. But something stopped me, and I said, here's what we're doing and why. She said, "My father was a heart donor." I went, "What?" I said, "Sit down. You're going to read this letter. You're the person I need."
Yeah, no kidding.
So she read the letter that I had developed over a year and a half ago, or during the year and a half process. She read it, and she's finished reading this letter, and tears were streaming down her face. And I'm thinking, man, I've really blown this badly. I said, "That bad?" She said, "Nope, that good." I said, "Did you get a letter from your recipient family?" She said, "No, we never did." I said, "Well, tell you what, as soon as I get this typed up, you're getting this copy of this for you and your family, because I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm sorry to put you through this emotional trauma all over again." She said, Nope, it was all good. Happy to help."
Now,
So that was...
And now, I don't know if she mentioned this or not when you were doing or letting her read your letter, but now I have talked to a few donor mothers who had lost, their sons, and they became organ donors, and because I remember when I had to write that letter. Well, you don't have to write the letter, but I wanted to write the letter, but you're so nervous, like you were, on how to write this. How do I write a letter telling everyone I'm feeling so good? I'm doing things that I could never do before, and I am so appreciative, and sorry for the loss of your loved one. But after talking to these donor families, so I do want to stress this to everybody who writes that letter. If you haven't had your transplant yet, or you haven't wrote your letter, that means so much to those donor families. She said, to know that my son's heart is beating in another person, to know that his lungs are helping someone breathe, that it doesn't really give them closure, but it makes them feel like their loved ones are still living on in other people. So those letters, no matter how they come out, I think are just so important to those donor families. And maybe she reacted to the letter you wrote. Did she have any, comments, or did she express how that made her feel, even though, it wasn't your heart, his heart, or, her loved one's heart that you got.
Right.
But, she...
No, her response was very, very positive. And as part of the letter, I wanted to let the donor family know that I would be willing to meet with them either in person or virtually. If they wanted to listen to their heart beating, I was happy to allow that. They have not chosen to do that yet. They did respond to my letter and gave me a little brief synopsis of what had happened to their mom. And it turned out at the time we were doing in 2011, at least, all we got was a age and a sex. We didn't have any other information than that of who our donor was. So I actually had a 49-year-old female donor, and we learned from her daughter's letter thanking me for my letter that she died in a motorcycle accident, but had been on life support. Her accident was in December, and she was kept on life support until April, when she developed pneumonia, and they decided finally it was time to turn off life support. So I thought that was rather interesting that my heart was kept alive artificially for essentially 4 months till I was in need of one. Everybody asks, how long were you on the waiting list? And I had a short wait. I was on 2 weeks. It's based on your blood type and your body size. And I'm fairly small and had A positive blood, which was a good blood type to have for transplant, apparently.
And another thing too, I know is like I was on a drip, and I think you said you were on a drip also. And
PICC line.
they would also put me like, in the hospital. Then I'd have to leave because of insurance purposes for about a week and then come back for 10 days. And I had a swan in me and everything else. And I guess that always takes you up the list if you're on a drip and, where they know that your time is limited. And they even told me, I know that they said, well, after we took that heart out, we're amazed you are still alive.
All right, one more quick vignette, I promise. I'm not going to belabor this.
Don't worry about it.
But this is kind of funny because what you say is absolutely true. People in the hospital, in ICU, get bumped up on the list, higher priority, because they're closer to death, obviously. So I worked the day before my transplant. PICC line in place. I was getting cardiac drugs dripped into my heart every minute, I guess. Depending how it was set, regardless. So we got the call in the middle of the night, and we had to be there in 2 hours. That was the deal. So Fort Myers is almost exactly 2 hours from Tampa, depending how you drove. My daughter drove pretty fast that night. And so we went to the emergency room, went in, told them I was there while I was there. They'd give me a call. There was a heart available. And this is my second trip because I came up the first time. And they came out and they said, we've examined the heart. It's an okay heart, but we don't transplant okay hearts at Tampa General. You're going to have to go home and come back again. So that was a little disappointing. But within 2 weeks, they had another heart. And so we got up there and they said, okay, well, you want to go down this hall and down here, and the transplant team is waiting. And so I got up the hall and my wife was with me, and I knew where it was because I'd been there before, and it said, authorized personnel only. Well, I'm a doctor. I'm authorized, right? So I just walk in, and they just kind of turned around and stared and said, "Excuse me, can we help you?" I said, "Yes, I'm here for a heart, please." And it was stunned silence. And they said, "What's your name?" And I gave them my name, and then cheering broke out like it was New Year's Eve, clapping and cheering. They said, people don't walk in here for heart transplants. They roll in on gurneys like 8 shades of gray.
I know. I think we all have some wild stories about the transplant in the hospital for sure.
So that was an interesting way to start the heart transplant, with cheering and clapping before it had even begun. But I had a wonderful experience at Tampa General, and I would recommend it strongly to anyone.
Now, I've got to ask you this, because a lot of patients have said, yes, I have changed. When you got your heart transplant, did you get any new tendencies, any new things maybe you enjoyed to eat that you never did before, or things you enjoy now that you never enjoyed before, that maybe are some traits from your donor?
Simple answer is no, but while I was at the hospital doing rehab, one of the nurses asked me a similar question. And I said no. I said, why do you ask? She said, well, we had a patient that was here once that did not play the piano before the heart transplant, and then immediately when they got home started taking piano lessons, and then later found out that their donor was a concert pianist.
I think the strangest story I have heard to date is the donor mother who went with her older daughter, it wasn't a child, to hear the heartbeat of their son in the recipient. And,
right.
They got to listen to the heartbeat, which was amazing. And they talked about that. And then I guess as they were leaving, this man that got the heart, for some odd reason, when they were leaving, they were outside. He picked up leaves off the ground and threw them at the daughter. And the daughter immediately started crying. And of course, he's apologizing, saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And the mother goes, you don't get it. Her brother used to throw leaves on her when they were small. And it was just,
oh gosh,
tell me that doesn't put, cold chills down your back.
Doo-dah, 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 doo-dah.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'm almost, even telling the story, I break out almost in tears. But I remember her telling it. It was just, it took me to my knees.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
Well, I'm going to let you go because I know you're a busy man, but anything else you want to tell us about or talk about before we let you go? Because, this is your time to tell your story. And, there may be some things I missed out on.
No, I've already had 2 last vignettes that I've shared, but I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. I think it's doing a good thing. It's learning people the need for donors. None of my kids were my kids are all adults now, and none of them were organ donors before my transplant. All of them are organ donors now. And that goes down another generation. A lot of my grandkids who are adults now are also organ donors. And one of the most touching things, I think, was I had a grandson who would have been, 13 years ago. He'd probably been 8 or 9 when I was getting ready to have my heart transplant. And he volunteered to be a donor for his grandpa.
Amazing.
And he said, do heart donors live after they donate their hearts? And his mom said, no, I'm sorry they don't. And he said, I'd still give mine to grandpa.
Great story.
And that choked me up.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Maybe as a doctor, I can ask you this too, because it seems like, and I don't know if it's the meds, if it's having so many heart casts and, going under, or what, but it seems like the smallest things will tear me up or make me cry these days.
I'm a kind of a sensitive guy along those lines too.
Yeah, I just want.
It's probably getting a second chance. I mean, the fact that we, maybe we feel like we don't totally deserve a second chance, but we got it anyway. And okay, one more important thing. This is very important because one of my hangups before getting the transplant. And they, as you recall, they do a complete workup. They, have everybody come in, gastroenterology, you have to have colonoscopy and urology, psychology, blah, blah, blah. So the psychologist was visiting with me and she said, is there anything about getting a heart transplant that bothers you? I said, yeah, there really is. And she said, well, why don't you share with me what that is? I said, well, I don't like the idea of someone else dying in order for me to live. I just don't feel good about that. And she looked me right in the eye and she said, you realize whether they give you that heart or not, they're still going to be dead.
Right.
And it was something like so common sense and concrete. I'd never thought of it before. I was just kind of on the emotional end of, someone loses a loved one just for me, but that isn't exactly the way it works.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. And, like I said, a lot of transplant patients, actually go through a rough time in the beginning because of that. And so, that's kind of the way I try to look at it too. There's nothing I could have done that would have changed the situation. And I am just thankful for the family who decided to donate the organs from their loved one because it was a great sacrifice, for them to give that up. And it was a great sacrifice to me. And I'd just so much appreciate it, as I think every transplant patient does, no matter what the organ is, from lungs to livers to kidneys to pancreases. We all appreciate the gift.
Yeah, when I was under surgery in the waiting room, there was another family there that was getting kidneys from the same donor. So an organ transplant donor can save 7 lives and affect 50 or 60 others with donation of skin and corneas, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's not just one person you're going to save their life, but they're doing pancreas. They're donating pancreases now too. And so there's so much out there, and medicine steps a leap forward every chance he gets. So we'll see more and more down the road. PJ, great visiting with you by phone. I look forward to seeing you in person next time you're down this way.
All right. Yeah, I miss seeing you as a doctor now that I'm up here in Central Florida. It was always a pleasure to get together. I always, I shouldn't say this maybe. I always felt sorry for some of the other patients because you and I would get talking about our transplants and I'm going, oh man, I know he's got more patients. I should be getting out of here. And here we are, talking about transplants. But I appreciate, each and every time that we got together and hope we get together many times in the future. And the best of luck to you and continued success to your daughter too. And thank you for sharing your story.
Everybody says you're so lucky. I said, no, I'm so blessed. This is a gift from God as well as a gift from humanity. But be assured that I chew the fat with most of my patients, so you didn't get that much special attention.
Want to thank Dr. Robert Pritt for sharing his story with us today on Gift of Life. And make sure you join us each and every week for a new heartfelt episode, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. If you have a transplant story you'd love to share it with us, just send us an email, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and don't forget to like and share this episode. Until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey and reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and to treasure the extraordinary gift of life.